You are listening to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida.
Hello and welcome to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast. My name is Tom Augerson. I'm your host, and my co-host today is Kelly Allen. Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Tom. On the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, we explore how we as Jesus followers can connect the dots between education, contemporary culture, and biblical theology. And today we are so excited to welcome two very important guests today from Humanities department, Miss Slemp, who you teach 7th through 9th grade English?
In general, yes.
In general, at CCS. We are so excited to have you today. And we have Jake Veleber, who is a senior at CCS and has been with Miss Slemp for a very long time. Yes, and so we are so happy to have you both. Let me introduce you a little bit more. You have a bachelor's degree, Miss Slemp, in elementary education from Southeastern University.
Yes.
Yes, and you've taught a variety of subjects and grades, but your favorite is where you are right now.
Yeah, 7th, middle school, 7th, 8th, and then going into 9th grade. They're my favorite.
That's such a wonderful thing, because not everyone can say that.
They're a little crazy, but I
hey,
love them.
But in a good way.
I love them.
There is not very many people who
you have
choose
to love. When I taught middle school all the time, you have to love them.
Yes.
Because otherwise you probably wouldn't do it.
I know.
Yeah, so it's good.
They're
So
great.
you've been at CCS for 7 years now. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
I have. Jake was part of my first class here when he was in 6th grade.
Wonderful.
And wait, so you went to like Southeastern in Lakeland?
Yes.
No kidding. You know what? Weird factoid. Southeastern University is like 3 blocks from where my mom lived in Lakeland back in the day. That is so weird. That's great though, because I remember when it was Southeastern College.
Well, it was. When I was there, it was Southeastern College.
But you're right. Now it's Southeastern University. So anyway, I just thought that was a neat connection.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and Jake, you're a senior this year.
I am.
Awesome. And
exciting.
yeah, and so you've learned a lot from Miss Slemp over the years, and she's helped you with writing and what do you want to do? What are your plans after school?
Yeah, so right now the plan is going to college. I haven't decided yet where. I'm still kind of waiting to hear from God where He wants me to go and what He wants me to do. So I'm giving it some time, even though deadlines are approaching.
Yep.
You seem very calm, though. I love that. It's like, hey, I know deadlines are
Not too stressed about it.
Oh, that's good.
Well, I tell you just the small bit that I know about you. I know you're a man of many talents. You are athletic, you're musical, and apparently a wonderful writer. So,
Yeah.
Welcome.
So what subject do you like the most? Like, do you just like, hey, this is really cool? You can say something other than English. I know it's tough right now.
Yeah.
Pressure's on, but
I don't know. There's a lot of cool parts of different subjects. Like I liked our first semester we did oceanography, and I'm a big beach guy, so that was cool.
Okay.
Learning more about something I'm already interested.
Nice.
Math, the solving part of it is kind of cool when we don't have too many formulas, but the stuff that's easy and you can work through, and it's like, wow, I'm getting this.
Okay, cool.
I really like that. And then poems and literature and writing, it's cool. There's a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't know about because we don't look into it much nowadays. But I enjoy it. I've had to write a lot of essays this year.
Yeah.
But
So do you think that you'll be more likely, because you love the beach and everything, do you think you'll be more likely to go to college in like Florida or California or something? Or
I did look at colleges in Florida over at UNF, but I think right now my top choice is going to Sanford, where both my parents went there.
A lot of people I know have gone to Sanford, had a great education there. It was a good thing. So very cool, very good. So
a factoid there is that we spent a year in Alabama because my husband went to Sanford for a year of grad school there.
All right, very good. It's all starting to come together.
Yeah.
All right. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about the bios? Are you good?
No, we're
You're good? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question to get us started, and this could be for both of you, and we'll start with you. So I'm going to give you the question every English teacher hates, which is, what is your favorite book that you personally have read? Whether you taught it or not, one of your favorite books.
I will say, in all honesty, it is a book that I've taught that my students don't like a lot, and that's Pilgrim's Progress. Because I hadn't read it before, and I find it very challenging, spiritually, personally.
Okay.
So each time you read it, it's an easy read, really, but when you really look at what they're trying to say, and it makes you think about your life and I really have enjoyed that book
so
and
like
rereading it. It's an allegory of the Christian life.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm going to ask you, kind of, since you brought that, I'm going to ask you if, in a second, we'll give you a chance to think, if you like Pilgrim's Progress or if you ever read it. But it's true. So many students. Have you ever read it?
Yes, and I have to tell you, when Hannah was reading it, my oldest, who's in 9th grade now, she read it with you. I wanted to know what she was reading as a parent, and so I picked it up and read it and loved it. And I feel like it's something that everybody should read. I guess CCS thinks the same thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like you could read it over and over and over and get new things out of it.
There's not many books I reread over and over again on purpose.
Yes.
But Pilgrim's Progress is one that I would, because you get a little bit more each time you read it.
You really
but that's
do.
so funny is most kids I've talked to can't stand it.
And I can see why.
Why do you think it is?
I think honestly, I think CCS should do it when they're younger, just to get their feet wet in it, and then do it again when they're older. Because, like, I think an older person who has lived a little longer, you know, who's had more real experiences, can relate with that book.
Okay. Have you read it, Jake?
I think I may have read it in the past, maybe like middle school. I don't know if I did it in your class.
Do you have any opinions about it?
It might have been so long ago that I couldn't really remember about it.
It stuck with you. I can see that. That's okay. I'm just kidding. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
You've read a lot of books, and I get it. So Pilgrim's Progress is near the top of your list.
Yes.
All right.
Yes,
that's really cool. So what about you? What's one of your favorite books that you've read?
One of the ones I've gone through recently is Screw Tape Letters, and that one's challenging, definitely. I've tried to we went through it with my small group at church years back, I think during the end of middle school, maybe like freshman year. And my freshman mind wasn't really ready to go through that, nor did we have the focus. But to take the time to look through it in details now as a senior, and with my class, with my teacher, all looking through that, it's been really cool to see and see how I can connect with how he was writing. It's been a fun read.
Great writer, he just is. So it's funny because whenever I hear seniors talking about their freshman mind, when you look at freshmen now, do they look really young to you? Do they seem really young?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, isn't that funny how that happens? Mm-hmm. And middle schoolers seem like, kind of like really young to you. So it's funny how that perspective changes as you go along. So, that's really great. So you were going to ask maybe a little bit about, I think, maybe Johnny Tremaine and some of the classroom conversations.
Yeah, I'm really interested in some of the classroom conversations that you have. You go into not just Christian books, you have non-Christian books and non-Christian writers. One of them is Johnny Tremaine. And I really am interested to know what your classroom conversations look like revolving around that book. Like, what kind of issues come up that the kids are asking about?
It's middle school, so they don't always ask the questions, but I'm asking and probing, trying to get them to think. Sometimes, and it depends on the class, this year, one of the things that came up was just understanding authority. The Johnny Tremaine is about the beginning of the Revolutionary War, and which side should you be on? Why should you be on that side? And then we start what does the Bible say about authority? And because they automatically feel like, oh, I would have been a Tory, or I would have been a Whig, I would have been for or against this war. They are strong about that. But then when we start going and just starting to think about what God says about authority, and I can't tell them what was right or wrong, but it made them think. And one of my students specifically said, this is hard, which is what I wanted. I wanted them to think, and I wanted them to not just have their own opinions, but to go back to what Scripture does. So I always have Scripture that they have to go back and read and try to apply and just make them think. Argue for the other side. You say that was the right thing to do, but is there anything in Scripture that might support the other side? Is there anything in Scripture that would support your side?
That's really good.
Just to start that dialogue. Sometimes we get a lot of dialogue. This year we did. That was helpful. And then you see character growth. Johnny Tremaine starts out as a prideful youngster their age who's got an anger issue a little bit. And so, he's told to count to 10 at one point. So then we can get into just practical everyday, how do we be kind to one another? Here's some of the ways we can do it, holding our tongue for just 10 seconds. So little things like that come up.
For those of us who kind of live with this every day, that just seems like, oh yeah, well that's, we just do that. But that's not that common. I mean, people don't really do that much.
To hold their tongues and their thoughts?
Well, that too. That's not exactly what I was thinking of. But that is actually a truth. But I was thinking more of just taking the time to unpack a book and look at it through the lens of biblical worldview, which is essentially what you're saying. And so that, Jake, what's that been like for you? Like as you've grown up from that freshman mind up to being a senior, how do you feel like maybe your approach to literature, stories, poems, etc., maybe has changed or evolved over those years when it comes to biblical worldview?
Yeah. I mean, just as I've grown, I've been more aware of what I read, what I listen to, and so in the reading side of it, I'm always like curious about the book. The book can be interesting, but then also like in the back of my mind, I have those guidelines, my morals, what I know from the Bible, what's true, what I should be taking into my mind, what I should be thinking about. So just having that in the back of my mind is always helpful in any basis.
That's so good, because that's kind of what we aim to instill, is that very thing that Jake just mentioned. We've been talking about biblical worldview with our core members, our faculty and staff, and we're talking about biblical worldview as sort of like an OS, an operating system, that's always being updated in the back. Whether we know it or not. And then we have to put up firewalls, and that's kind of what Jake was saying. There are a set of rules, essentially, that filter things that come in and that kind of thing. And so that was actually a really great explanation of what worldview is, what biblical worldview is, and what we're trying to accomplish. So that's really neat. Why do you think that's really hard for a lot of young people, Jake? Because it is hard for a lot of young people.
Yeah, it's definitely hard not to get caught up in the things, because especially with the young mind, you can just get drawn into things and you don't quite know like where your boundaries are. You haven't set your lines because your mind isn't mature yet and things like that. So that's something that makes it difficult.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe the average kid is still wrestling with that. We used to, when I taught regularly, we used to talk about grappling, which is essentially what you're doing, grappling with these difficult ideas that are really important ideas and deserve to be grappled with, and that's part of it. So, and The Giver is another book. I know that's been around a long time. Do you remember when it was written? It's been around a long time.
I don't remember when it was
and it's written. Well, I was just curious. It's such a classic book. And my kids that graduated from CCS remember that book a lot. What do you think is important about The Giver?
There's a lot of different things about it. There's definitely the value of life in there. When Gabriel is released, and they realize what that is, they are bothered by that, which they should, because he's killed, basically, or is going to be. And so to watch my students be bothered by that just because he wasn't the ideal person, I like to see that and to discuss that with them. So you've got the value of life that's really important. And it also we talk a lot about memories. They get to write a memoir and related to that and be expressive and try to explain that. But why is it important? Why is it important that we have memories? Why it'd be nice to get rid of the hard times, but when we get rid of the hard times, we also get rid of the valley or the mountaintops too. Right. Like we have to go through hard times. We value the good times when we go through the bad times. So, kind of working through that stuff. Sure, at first it sounds like it'd be really easy for life to be the same and to have what we consider normal just to be normal and to not have hardships. But hardships helps us to grow. It helps us to love. It helps us to experience life. And so that's fun to watch them read through that and be like, oh, this is awful, or, oh, this is good, to work through. And then just have those questions. Is it important to remember? Is it important to have the hard times to go through?
Yeah, it's just when you were talking, you reminded me of that. I think we've talked about this on another podcast, the issue of Stoicism, which is a very popular philosophy, especially with young men today. And it really tries to narrow that emotional range band. It's like you don't want to get really high, you don't want to get really low. Famous example is a Stoic philosopher went to his little kid when they were sleeping and gave him a kiss, but then reminded himself to remember the kid was going to die. And so don't love him too much. And it's like, wow. So, but the idea there is to keep, if you keep the range narrow, you won't get hurt too badly and you'll be able to get through life without as much trouble. which in the end is kind of I think a kind of bankrupt philosophy, in my opinion. But it is. Have you heard anything about this? There are a lot of books out on this.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's
Not too
very,
much.
very common today, because for some males that's very appealing, because they don't like to talk about their emotions perhaps anyway, and so minimizing that is actually kind of an attractive thing. But anyway, I was just thinking, but you're trying to get across with Unpacking the Giver by saying it is important to feel.
It is.
Yeah.
And then you were bringing up things when in books, when we're reading different books and we're looking at the trauma that a character went through and the need for forgiveness, the need to forgive, the need to move on. I mean, these are biblical concepts that are hard. Yes. You know, forgiveness is hard. When you're talking about friends within a middle school classroom, and that you have to forgive the person that hurt you, and how you reconcile and what's the purpose behind all of that. And those are hard things that come up in our literature. And it just comes up. You know, it's one of the, as we're reading and people make comments, we can kind of then go down that rabbit trail. And I will say sometimes it's really fun because it attaches to what Mr. Collier has talked about. And in chapel, you know, when he said, and I can go the next day and go, remember he said, it's neat to make those connections too in class.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think that's one of the beauties of trying to think biblically through the whole curriculum and not just in chapel. You know, I love that. I think that's super important. So when you know, Jake, as you're kind of processing this conversation, and we talked about why it might be difficult for any kid, any young person, you're not a kid anymore, any young person who's trying to develop a biblical worldview, what do you reckon it'll be like when you go on to college? Do you have any sense of, whether through siblings or people you've known, do you feel like that's going to be another challenge in keeping hold of that biblical worldview, or not so much, do you think?
I think there will definitely be challenges. It also kind of depends where I end up. I know it'll be different going to a large state school versus going to a small private Christian university. But I know in both areas there will be challenges.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've gotten a good foundation, right? And I think that's the key, and you've been a big part of that.
Well, and I think that's just it, the foundation. When our students go off, my daughter graduated from CCS and went off, they are exposed to more of the secular world, which we need to be in the world, but to be able to hold on to what they've been taught and grounded in, their foundation is secure.
Yeah, I want to reinforce what you just said, because I really, really believe strongly in this, and we do talk about it quite a bit on the podcast. But it's that idea that we do have kind of that Abraham Kuyper view of the world, which says we're supposed to be in the world, but not of it. We're not supposed to just circle the wagons and go inward. We're actually supposed to be opening up towards culture. And if we have a solid biblical worldview and we're staying tethered to the Scriptures, and we're realizing that we're filled with the Spirit, then we can do that without being afraid of other ideas. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes we can be fearful to hear ideas that are not like yours. But if you realize that you're secure in who you are and what you believe, then that's a big help. So you have a ninth grader, right? So as you hear this, I'm curious to know how you're processing this. So when you hear Jake talking about where he is as a senior, how does that relate to what you hope for Hannah?
I think there's something to be said about CCS's process of wanting students to think well. And I see that in the Humanities department, and I see that with you, Jake. I'm so excited to be a part of it, or for my child to be a part of it. Just to have those conversations, I think that is the way that you think well. Like, you have to go into those areas and, you know, with those young minds, and grapple and go through all of it. Like, don't be scared of anything. And I love that about your program, is that you're not scared to talk about those things, and that, you know, Chapel backs that up. Chapel backs up what you're saying.
Does Hannah read a lot? I'm just curious, or do your kids in general read a lot of outside of school? Or
not particularly.
Not so much? Yeah.
No.
Well, that's very common.
Yeah.
You know, it really is. And some of our kids and some of our kids did, and then some of our kids didn't.
Yeah.
And, you know,
I do have to say, Hannah, of all of my children, reads the most of all of them. I've really appreciated what you've done with her. I wanted to ask you, what do you hope, you know, is there anything other than the students thinking well that you hope that they leave you with? Like some type of, something that they've gained from the humanities program. Is there any other takeaways that you're trying when you have this 7th grader come in? You're like, well, I want them to leave me looking like this.
Well, it's not just literature.
Yeah.
It's all about writing and communication.
Yeah.
And to be able to communicate well, to be able to listen well, and then to respond well.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we have the Great Commission. We have to share Christ with the world. How can we do that effectively? They don't see necessarily the purpose in that now, but I hope that one day they can, to watch somebody like Jake, then when they get into JREX in 11th grade, and be able to articulate a point of view and to argue for his ideas, his thoughts from a biblical perspective, and to do that well, I think communication becomes a big key.
It's huge. Jake, can you take a second and just kind of remind our listeners what JREX is? Because some people don't know what we're talking about. So
JREX stands for Junior Research Exhibition. And so I believe it's at the end of 10th grade that we Dr. Eller in philosophy, he started us to get into controversial topics that we could argue about. So we started there, but then going into 11th grade is when we start. The full first semester is all research. So you're digging into your topics, you're coming up with arguments and support. And I think what we were all talking about is the foundation is super important with that, because you can dive into what you believe, what the world thinks about your argument, but having that foundation is really important. So the first semester is all coming up with your paper, your essay, topic, and then towards the end of the semester is when you start talking and you start practicing. And speech class was a big part of that too. A lot of practices that I wasn't really familiar with, but was really helpful. And then up until JREX night, and I think late February, is just practice, doing a lot of talking, which was really important, and I think it'll definitely help me in my future.
Yeah, I mean, so you end up having to get up in front of people, an audience, and provide your presentation using slides, et cetera. And then the part I love the most about JREX, but it's the hardest thing, is having to field live questions.
From a panel of experts.
On the stage. And I've just loved watching the development of kids as they do that, and they learn how to do that, because a lot of adults would hate that. They would not want to do that, but overall, our kids do really well.
So I've heard.
So, and that's what the experts tell us. So that's a really good thing. And I'm glad to hear you can, because my kids that went through it also have testified. That when they got to college, honestly, in some cases, they were some of the few people that actually did anything of that magnitude. Any kind of project that was like a meta project like that.
And that's what I've heard. We reach out to alumni, and we have an alumni feature once a month.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and they talk about just everything that CCS did and how well that they've succeeded.
It's interesting because we sit here and it can start to sound like this one long CCS commercial.
I could do a CCS commercial.
I know you could, and you do it really well. But I want to point out, for the benefit of our listeners that kind of go, oh my goodness, really, and it's like, the school is not perfect the reason it's not perfect because we're not perfect, and we all need Jesus. And so I just every once in a while I want to bring that up to say it's like we all have our struggles and everything, but I will say, and what I always say about CCS is that CCS does a lot of things well. There's probably other institutions that might do this thing a little bit better or this thing a little bit better, but I honestly feel that CCS across the board holistically provides an excellent education for kids, including the leadership program and all the other spiritual formation, all those things, and the academic world. And so I know I'm supposed to say that. And
you really believe it.
I really do believe it. I put my kids through it. I mean, that should count for something, They didn't really have much choice in the matter as you go along. So maybe a good way to, as we begin to kind of steer towards the close here, I'd love to hear just a general thought from you, Tabetha. When you think about the importance of bringing God's truth into a conversation, we talked about some specific things with those two books we talked about. But just in general, how important do you think that is just for people in their daily lives?
Well, it's vital. It's not about our opinions. It's about God's opinion. And so if we just read a book or do research, you can get somebody on your side anywhere. Just go Google it. You'll find somebody who agrees with you.
Right. I was going to say, you can find some expert that agrees with you.
But that's not what's important. Our important is that we have God's ideas, his thoughts, but we're only going to get that by reading his word. Yeah. We're only going to get that by looking at what he has to say about the topics. So I make the students pull out their Bibles and read some verses to connect, to try to make them think about what does God say about this particular topic.
Oh, that's so good. And I think that as we do that, even though it is, sometimes it's helpful when somebody makes us do it, because our will is not always that active, in it. And it can be annoying at the time. But if we immerse ourselves in the Word enough, when the Bible starts to be our vocabulary, and it starts coming out when we don't even realize it's coming out, and that's like a great sign.
Well, and I hear people like Jake saying that he's trying to be careful about what he reads and what he's doing. He's trying to, that's what we want, is we want them to begin to think biblically themselves.
Yeah. Well, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on this large topic here towards the end of our time together. So we won't be able to go super deep into it, but I wanted to touch on the issue of technology and the effects that it has, especially predictively in the humanities. Whether it be something as simple as Audible or other things other platforms that might summarize a book. We were talking about this before we started recording. Is it okay if we take a book like Tale of Two Cities or Johnny Tremain and we get AI, artificial intelligence, to tell us what are the 6 main points of the book, and then say we've basically read the book? I mean, I'll start with you, Jake. What does that feel like to you? Does that seem like okay or not okay? Why do you think that?
I know it's definitely the easy route, but it just takes away like the authenticness of reading a book and having the paper in your hands and like turning the pages.
So the tactile part of it as well.
It just takes away from, like, really you're not really into the book, especially if you're just reading the main points. But I think through a screen is much different than reading it on paper. You can be more immersed into it reading the physical copy.
Yeah. We had what was the podcast we were talking about where we reflected on the fact that when digital textbooks first came out, they thought everybody was going to go to them, and then a lot of schools did, and now they're all going back.
Right.
And many of them are going back the other way again.
Yeah.
Because when you do polls, and when we did polls at CCS, we get like 50-50. When it first started, like 2012, 13, something like that, we'd do polls, and it'd be like 50% of the kids thought it was great, and 50% wanted hardcover text and paper.
Yeah.
And I think now if you polled people, it'd be almost everybody. Probably, I don't know, Jake, what do you think? Do you think most of your classmates would prefer hard books as opposed to digital?
I don't know. I think it could go either way.
Maybe it's still 50-50.
And a lot of your textbooks in college probably are going to be digital rentals. Right, so you get done and you paid a lot of money. You got Zippo.
Yeah,
at the end.
That's right.
Right. So what do you think, Tabetha, from your perspective? Maybe pros and cons of some of the technology.
Oh, the technology it's hard. It's hard. But like he said, you're missing so much of it.
Yeah.
Not just holding it, but all the details, all the interesting parts of a book, how things develop. You're just getting the summary of the story. You're just getting the highlights. You're not getting.
Which is what some people will go, exactly. That's why it's great. I'm just playing devil's advocate, right? Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point. I mean,
but that's not learning. That's not learning, and that's not discovering, and that's not experiencing, and that's not getting into why a character did what he did or why this happened. That's just getting a grade.
Yeah, or it's just saying you checked it off, sort of. I mean, there's an app online that I look at occasionally, but you can read like a business book a day for a month and it'll change your life and all this kind of stuff. Well, you don't read the book. You're reading a summary that's like an executive summary. It's like a page long. And again, with that kind of book, well, yeah, maybe, because they're not that hard to understand usually, and they're usually a main point. But we're not talking about those kind of books. And there are different kinds of books, like a poem. Why would you want to look at here's the 3 summary points of this Robert Frost poem? It's like, who would want to do that? I don't know. You know what I'm saying, Jake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're actually in a poetry unit right now in my dual enrollment class, and it's been cool to see, like, there's so much stuff underneath just the words that were written, and we went through and annotated so much of what this could mean, what you interpret it could mean, and there's just so much under the depth that we don't look at just by reading it and saying, that's it, check.
So I'm gonna give a trigger warning now, because I'm about to say something that we'll probably get a lot of negative comments towards me about. But I know a lot of people will say, I want to do that with the summary and the little bullet points and everything because I'm really busy. But sometimes the real reason is we're lazy. And we don't want to go to the trouble of actually having to think through. We want to get the icing without whatever, the vegetables. And so that's a very unpopular thing to say, and it's not true of everyone.
Right.
But I think there is maybe a little bit of that. I mean, what do you think? Am I way off base?
No, I think I think you have something there, and that it might be, lazy thinking. I think that when you do pick up the book and read all of the details, you really find the joy of reading. I think that's what you're teaching.
That's a great point. Yeah, the whole joy of reading thing. So we probably should just deal quickly with, for now because of time, just the idea that not everybody reads well. And that's a real thing, right?
No, yeah.
And we want to acknowledge when we talk about this that not everybody is a great reader, but that doesn't mean there aren't some books that they could benefit from.
Sure, and practice. You read more and you get better at it.
And there it is, yeah.
Even this year, I've watched my 7th graders with their fluency, and they're reading much more fluent. And we read The Hobbit together. That's not an easy read, but it was fun. And I love The Hobbit because it's not my genre of favorite type of reading. I considered my first year not doing the Hobbit.
That's sacrilegious.
I know. But then we read it as a class. We read it together as a class. And I had students that left and went and read the Lord of the Rings next.
Oh, nice.
So, which actually, non-readers, those people that you say that don't pick up a book, they loved it.
Right.
So they went on to read more books. So reading a variety of different books. And sometimes we do start easy. That's okay. Pick up an easy book to read,
right.
and read with somebody. I'm a big fan of reading together.
Yeah.
I read to them, they read to me. We listen to audiobooks of some of them. We do a little bit of all of it. As they get more comfortable, they read more.
And it's important to start young. And I worked at a school one time in a large city where none of the kids, I remember talking to parents in this school, and they said, and some of the parents would say, this kid, I've never read a book to my kid, ever. And then they came to school, and as far as reading readiness, as they say, it just was absent. And so that's a tough hill to climb when you're starting that way. And some other schools I've been in, would have kids even in middle school who'd say, I never read a book. My parents never, ever read me a book because they thought it was a waste of time. I could have been working.
That's just sad.
It is kind of sad, right?
Sad.
It is.
It's
and work
time
is
with
important.
your child.
Well, right.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's also the bonding part of that too. Is just hanging out with your kid and sharing that. That whatever it is. So yeah. So I admit I have a bias in this, right? Because I think books and reading is extremely important. Authors have been my mentors throughout my whole life, and I have way too many books. It's a confessional. I have way too many books. When we moved from Tallahassee the first time to New York City and moved into an apartment, I got rid of or sold over 1,000 books.
Wow.
Which I personally thought was incredibly sacrificial of me to do. Now, the sad thing is that over time, they have crept back in. And now I have books everywhere in the house and everything. And I have so many that you would think I'd be smarter because I've read a lot of books. But anyway, but I do. I think they're really, really more important than the average modern person realizes. I really do. Well, this has been wonderful. I love this conversation. I could go on for a really long time, but I won't. Yeah, and so do you have any maybe final thoughts, maybe a word to folks who are kind of trying to figure out how to get their kids interested in reading, perhaps? Maybe something like that. What do you think might be a good thing for parents as they consider?
read something that's easier. We don't have to shoot for this moon the first time. You don't have to read the hardest thing. Read easy things and read together. I did that with my daughter when she was young. She was not quite reading as fluently as her teacher would want her to. We just started with really easy books and progressed to harder books. I remember with my son, he didn't want to read that book that he had to read for school. So he read a page, I read a few pages, he read a page, I read a few pages. And then we were, Mom, I'm reading it, and I'd read it up at night, because I could stay up later. He'd read it in the car because I get car sick, to see who could finish the book. So, sometimes it's hard to get started, but if you just get started and do it together,
I love that. So it's really a collaborative event. I think that's fabulous.
And reading becomes easier the more you try
like a lot of
it.
skill,
You have to be exposed.
Yeah.
Just be exposed and read something that's fun. And it doesn't have to be, if they're interested in sharks, read about sharks.
Yeah. Well, listen, it has been a real pleasure talking with you guys. Thank you so much for, I know you're both very busy people, so thanks for taking the time to come on.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. And so we're going to end the way we always end. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening today, but we want to remind you that if you forget everything else that is said on this podcast, please remember that Jesus Christ is Lord. Thanks so much for watching.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Gospel Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida. You can find us online at myccs.org.